edition of the Mindset Game podcast, and I'm your host, James Roberts. Before we get started with this week's show, first off, let me take this opportunity to welcome back the regular listeners. And if this is your first time listening to the show, I hope you enjoy this episode and decide to subscribe to the show. I've got Professor Stephen Mellalieu. Stephen is a professor in sports psychology and the Associate Dean for Research for the Cardiff School of Sport at Cardiff Met University, formerly known as UWOC. Furthermore to that, he's also editor of the Journal of Applied Sports Psychology and the co-founder and network editor of World Rugby Sports Science. Thanks again, Stephen, for coming on.
No problems, James. It's nice to see you again. It's been a couple of years, isn't it?
Yeah.
A couple. Yeah, I think, how long has it now? About 7 or 8 years since...
Not yet.
Not yet.
Next summer it would be.
Yeah. So I remember you as a young undergraduate getting involved in all the labs and the practical activities. So it's how time flies.
Yeah, it's really gone by. So obviously, I've got the privilege of working with you all those years ago. Could you tell the listeners and obviously the viewers on YouTube a little bit more about yourself and how you got into originally sports science and then more on to specifically sports psychology?
Okay. Well, born and bred in Wales, from the West Wales in Swansea, and unlike any young Welsh child growing up, you wanted to represent your country at sport. My sport was rugby. Very lucky as I started to grow, I grew quite quickly, and I was an early maturer. So rugby was kind of my sport, and I was quite tall, so I ended up playing a little bit of rugby. And because I was quite tall and large for my age, as it were, sort of 12, 13, 14, I got picked for some representative teams, and then got a lot of coaching input. And sort of 17, 18 was in the Welsh kind of junior rugby squad for a while. Pursued that for a couple of years. I wanted to go to university to study sports science, to kind of, like most athletes do, you want to learn more about your performance and how you train to make yourself a better athlete. So I ended up in Loughborough University for a couple of years, and that was where my kind of interest in kind of sports science really got fired, and particularly sports psychology. And as my rugby career failed to materialise, as it were, and like so many people who work in sport, if you can't be the best at sport, you want to work with people and help them be the best, if you like, as well. So I kind of stayed on, did a master's, that turned into a PhD in sports psychology and stress in sport. And I like the idea of being an academic. You could train as a applied sports psychologist, work with athletes, if you like, do the research with the athletes, and then teach that knowledge that you've learned back to the students and the new sports psychologists and sports scientists generations as they came through. So I'm very much an academic that works within the real world, collects ideas and data and research from the real world athletes, and then puts that back into the training and education of that. I did my PhD in Gloucestershire Uni. I ended up going back to Swansea University for a good 12 or 13 years, combined that with some applied work within rugby and other professional sports, and then kind of moved to Cardiff for kind of a career progression as well. So it's been very exciting within that, and kind of my research interest is still within stress and sport, and probably around athlete and player welfare. So understanding the psychological challenges and demands that athletes have, and how we can support them on and off the field, really. Get them to be better people and better athletes all around.
Okay.
So that's me in a nutshell.
That's quite interesting. Obviously, when you say player welfare, obviously the big one at the moment in relation to rugby is obviously concussion. So when you say welfare, is it more broader term than just obviously injury?
Yeah, I mean, welfare covers a lot of different areas, welfare, particularly at different stages of an athlete's career, and there's different levels as well. Welfare, a lot of my work is around working with academy athletes who are experiencing the transition from maybe junior to senior level sport, or from semi-professional to professional level. So welfare around that is helping them balance, if they're under 18, helping them balance the demands of study, the growing demands of expectations to be a professional, and but keep a balance in their life with the off-field stuff as well. So, and some athletes that may be working at the other end of the scale who are coming to terms with retiring from sport, and how we manage and help support them into a new life and a new identity. Welfare can also just be around, day to day around the players, and making sure that they're getting treated and supported accordingly. Concussion is a massive thing in rugby at the moment, and I think it's a massive thing in a lot of team sports and contact sports. And it's an area almost where the industry is ahead of the science, if you like. So you probably see lots of adverts for concussion tests and concussion guidelines, and the science really isn't there yet to precisely define what concussion is, how we measure it, and more importantly, how we treat it as well. So it's about raising awareness when it comes to that. And obviously, as you mentioned, injury. Every athlete, whatever level they're competing at, will get injured at some point. And how we support athletes in managing that injury is kind of one of my interesting areas as well.
Okay. Yeah, so it's quite interesting. Obviously, you say covers a good. Obviously, I didn't think of the junior aspect of the rugby. Obviously, them coming through. Obviously, I've been fortunate as an athlete myself. I probably had it to some degree, but then obviously I was going from school into further education, and that transition, obviously, what I could think of was probably obviously. Like that close network you have, like friends, family, obviously coaches as that network to kind of get that smooth transition.
Yeah,
It's probably helped that my training base, obviously, when I was down in Swansea, was virtually opposite the university, so it kind of there was like little links anyway between the department and performance sport anyway, so.
Yeah, I think you find that, current thinking around transitions, is there a process? It's not just you turn up at uni, or you turn up for first team senior training, or you turn up in the senior squad for training in athletics, having been in the under-23s. It's not a discrete event. It's kind of a process, really. And the people that cope more effectively with the transition in and out of sport or through sport are the ones that have got better coping resources and better support networks as well. So you mentioned there, the physical environment being helpful to you in that respect, and probably a good family network as well. And I think in some sports, it's people stay within the area, they train within the area. But in other sports, maybe like professional football, soccer, people have to move away from home into academies, maybe often abroad nowadays, and that can be quite a challenge as well in itself. So it's about helping athletes be aware of the networks that are around them and offering support, but helping them develop the coping resources as well to manage those transitions. And that helps them transition to senior sport, but then also through the various aspects of their sporting career. And as you say, going from uni to full-time athlete as well can be a challenge in itself.
Well, when you say that, obviously, you could say take it both ways. Either the luxury or misfortune to combine trying to be an elite athlete, and then it was probably easier. Obviously, my first Paralympics tied in with my first year at uni, so that probably worked out quite nicely. Because obviously, it's not as important as it 3 years.
Yeah.
So I still did fairly well. Wanted to hit the ground running, and obviously it was probably maybe a little bit more difficult the second and third year. But obviously, I probably spent because I obviously had the opportunity of working youth for two out of the 3 years anyway.
Yeah.
Because obviously you try as you progress through sports science, so you've got to decide what route you're going to take. Obviously, be it physiology, biomechanics, or psychology.
Psychology, yeah. For
me, personally, obviously, physiology just got too even though it kind of weird one. Even though I did a physiology dissertation, it was still for me. It was just too difficult to comprehend. I just couldn't take in on the information. Biomechanics, was obviously, I was probably put off because obviously with all the math you have to do early
Yeah.
doors,
Yeah.
just in case it may go wrong with a computer. You're thinking, well, in this day and age, it shouldn't go wrong. And obviously, psychology was more, I found more useful, and obviously there was a better tie-in within. I could take it. It was a lot easier to take from what I'd learnt on the degree into my sport and vice versa. Whereas all the other ones, you'd have to read a lot more to be able to bring it across. And obviously, there's not well, to me, there's not that direct correlation as there was with sports psychology.
Yeah, and I think as well, you as an athlete, you get strength and conditioning support, you get technical analysis provided by you by the coaches, and there is psychological support available as well. But in terms of the priorities for funding, S&C coaches seen as fundamental for most of the sports, and then having a skills or a technical coach is there as well. And sometimes psychologists, rightly or wrongly, are down the pecking order in terms of a resource that's a luxury sometimes. So in a degree level, yeah, psychology I think is quite appealing to people, particularly some of the modules if they're what we call professional practice ones. I think that's something that I focused on when I taught, was teaching what I consulted and reflecting my experiences around that. So I know we did a lot around career transitions, injuries, and coach-athlete relationships and all of that. And I think that's important, that sometimes not everyone's going to be a sports psychologist or a physiologist when they've done their sports science degree, but they're going to go out and work in sport or be an athlete. And so giving them an understanding of the challenges and demands of athletes across the different areas, I think is important. So I've always tried to do that with my teaching, is make it relevant and interesting, and then the students tend to listen more, which is and if they listen more, they're interested. If they're interested, they tend to do better at the assignments because they work harder. So it all adds up in the end. But yeah, going back to your point about study and training, this notion of being a dual, like what we call a dual athlete or dual career athlete student, can be nice in some respects because it gives you time away from your training. It gives you something else to focus on your down days, and it helps you keep a balance and keep your training and your sport in perspective. But also there can be times, I imagine, when there's clashes and you've got exams and training camps and exams and major competitions or assessments due. And so that can be a real challenge for an athlete. But athletes are probably the most focused and organised and committed individuals, and so they can balance a lot of different, or keep a lot of balls in the air, if you like. Mm-hmm. And I guess you probably found that as well. It was being very organised and those kind of transferable skills from sport to study as well, and to business where you are now, I guess.
Well, within terms of me personally, I can't think of many clashes. Maybe with assignments, but then obviously I've got a schedule set out before the season starts with sport. Obviously, I know when I'm going to be away, so I've kind of got no excuse, obviously, in terms of the assignment due date to get it done. So obviously, it would depend on where we were. Obviously, when I found out when the submission date was for that piece of work, and obviously schedule that accordingly to what I need to do, be it either getting dispensation, obviously because I'm away, to get it to be so I'm able to submit it in later, or on most occasions I just got it done earlier and it's out the way. I can focus solely on training and not having to write a paper on the times that I'm supposed to be relaxing and having downtime.
Yeah, you do. I mean, I think it varies from sport to sport. In some sports, people are encouraged to study. They're 18, 19, they're on a semi-professional or development contract or a potential contract, and they're encouraged to study as well. And sometimes that can be, if it's not prioritised, there's lots of clashes with training schedules, then the study can suffer. So study isn't it for everyone, and sometimes there's a short window in some sports for kind of academy development and pathways. So it's best sometimes for them to come back to that at a later date. But that's a primary around athlete welfare in 18-year-olds, particularly in sports like rugby, where they could break their leg or snap their knee ligaments tomorrow at 18 and not be able to play sport again. They do need to think about having alternatives, not necessarily university education, but, kind of vocational training or experience as well is always useful. But we find there's a lot of 18-year-olds just want to play sport quite naturally and just see a career in their sport and nothing else. So it takes a while and takes maybe a couple of years for them to put a work with them to see the benefits of doing stuff away from their sport.
Also, good one you touch upon. Obviously, in my sporting career, we were taught it's going back a few years now. In swimming, obviously, it's like this triangle. Obviously, to cut it a little bit short, obviously, we're told, obviously, you've got your sport, your education, and your social life. Well, one's got to give, because obviously you can't balance all three. Yeah. So obviously, if you want to progress in sport, obviously, sport is going to be one. And depending on where you are in life, obviously, say teenager, obviously education is a big part. Obviously, in the UK, obviously it's mandatory up until 16, whereas the rest of the world is obviously 18. So it's going to be that longer stretch. And then obviously, if somebody decides to go on to further education, obviously that brings another total dimension to obviously that triangle. Obviously with going out, obviously it plays a massive part in university life. Obviously with a student, they've got to kind of find that little balance again. Obviously, okay, I want to get the university experience, however, be it for the higher ones in the sports, say football, rugby, and the ones who've got into university and are at elite level, obviously, they want to sample it a little bit, but the priority, obviously, is number one, is obviously to finish that degree, obviously, whatever you've chosen to do, is to study, and also your sport.
Yeah, and what you find particularly is, psychologically, at 17, 18, 19, 20, people are developing their identities. So they're exploring who they are and discovering who they are, and sometimes sampling different things. And, you see a lot of risky type behaviours between the ages of 18 to 24 because people are finding out who they are and what they're about and what they are and not. And what you tend to find with athletes who've come through from an early age, they've got a strong identity that they're an athlete and they're a sports person and that's what they're about. And it is important that as they go through those late teenage years, early adulthood, they are exposed to other things and they do get a broader sense of who they are, not just as an athlete. Because when their career finishes later on down the line, they may struggle with the fact that they can no longer be an athlete anymore and reinforce their confidence and identity by doing sport or competing at sport. And that's where problems can happen when people retire in certain sports. If sport is all they've known and that defines who they are, if you can't train every week or play or compete, you lose your sense of worth to a certain extent. So, as you say, that triangle and keeping that balance to a certain extent, or having a social life, not the typical student social life, but having a network of friends away from the sport and developing another career in through your education, or that helps to develop multiple identities and helps you to keep your balance, if you like. And when you get injured and when you have threats of retirement or whether you're going to make the games, all these things, if you've got just an athlete identity and nothing else, they can be major challenges and threats that you need to negotiate.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. It's probably something I didn't touch upon, obviously. Lost the train of thought. Obviously, with... I have to come back to that. I can't think what I was going to say.
I mean, you probably got, I think, your background, probably you had an identity. You saw yourself as an athlete, but you probably saw yourself as a student as well. But then, and your background from where you were brought up and your study and kind of the disability to a certain extent, you view yourself probably as a Paralympic athlete in that sense as well, rather than just an athlete. So I think you probably cope well with the transitions that you were placed in or went through because of your broad sense of worth and your multiple kind of identities to a certain extent. That would have helped that, definitely, I think. Would you say that's a fair point?
A little bit, obviously. I had I competed in 3 sports in the end, so obviously I had more transition than most athletes would like.
Yeah.
The first one, obviously, from swimming to rowing was probably quite a hectic one and quite difficult one, challenge to make the transition, because obviously originally I'd gone to Swansea as a swimmer.
Yeah.
And within about 3 months of being down there, obviously I'd been dropped from the national programme, so it was kind of getting my head round it. And obviously it coming up to the Christmas period and breaking up from university, well, I thought, my athletic career is finished now. I'll be coming back as a student in the new year. But obviously, with the programme we've got set up in Wales for disability sport, they try not to lose their athletes. So obviously they try and find something or other, a way of keeping you within that sporting environment. So in my case, it was moving over to rowing, and then kind of my career kind of jump started again, and it obviously took off.
Yeah. Well, look, I think you mentioned Sport Wales there and disability sport. They're very good at what they call talent recycling, and that's a kind of it's been a new word over the last 5 or 10 years, particularly in UK sport, is how you recycle athletes and maybe aren't quite at that point in time good enough for one particular sport and the skill set they can use elsewhere, and how you fast track them in as well. So how were you fast tracked into rowing? How did you cope with that transition of different sport, different training demands? Was it quite an easy one?
It was obviously the coping one was obviously going from development to performance.
Yeah.
That was probably a massive learning curve. I'll look back on it, because obviously the demands of that, obviously you haven't got time to develop. You need to a certain extent, obviously deliver every single. Well, with the case of rowing, obviously they have a World Championships every year. You get selected, you are expected to perform every single year, and with the emphasis at the end of the 4-year cycles, obviously the big one is competing in the Olympics or the Paralympics. So obviously with rowing, they're probably the World Championships are important, but they're kind of stepping stones to obviously that end goal of the Olympic cycle. So obviously the World Championships have a kind of a less of importance, because obviously they come around every year. So whereas other sports, it'll be, for I think athletics, for example, is I think every 4 years. So theirs is a bigger importance, because obviously there's more chance of you probably missing that one with it coming around every 4 years, whereas every year, be it barring injury or not being selected, you go to a World Championship. So obviously that's how Britain sees it. Obviously there's more, and it's the same with cycling. Obviously they generally peak for the Olympics, and obviously it was something in the press probably when the Olympics finished. Obviously I think it was the Australians saying, well, why is Britain dominating? Well, obviously from the outside, I know straight away that's what they're peaking for.
Yeah.
And they peak for every single time. But at the end of the day, that's what funding's based upon in this country, is based on the Olympics. So obviously they're going to do everything in their power, be it psychology, physiology, performance with the bikes, to get whatever I'll say that small 1% extra that the other countries don't have.
Yeah, and I think that's the ultimate in terms of focus is focusing on that full year, that those Olympic Games, and everything else is just preparation. Every race, every competition is just building towards that. And good coaches, good high performance teams, they'll experiment in some of the championships a year out. They'll trial different techniques or methods or bikes or equipment to get to test everything out, so that when they go into that final event, there's the big event, the Olympics, nothing's left to chance. Everything's tried and tested, and they know where they need to be. It is easy to get distracted by other championships or games or events, isn't it? And some people can be disappointed then if they haven't won a championship or done well at a championship on the way to that event. But as you say, ultimately, we're accountable through funding. If the sports don't achieve, they don't get the money, and it is ultimately based on winning medals. And it's been a very harsh regime they've introduced, over the last 10 or 15 years through funding, but it's been very effective, and it focuses coaches, it focuses support staff, and it focuses the athletes. So it can be brutal, but it's sport is tough, sport is harsh, and I think the Australians are quite envious of our regime and our system we have. Definitely.
Well, speaking to obviously strength and conditioning coaches, obviously one of my former ones. Obviously, he's now working within the Australian network of institutes of sports. Obviously, he's saying they were of sports science. They're probably the leading nation. Obviously, in early days, and we kind of touched upon. Obviously, their games that they actually did very, very well was obviously their home games, and they've kind of plateaued off, which has been the case with any host nation that's hosted it. Whereas you look at the Great Britain, obviously we kind of bucked that trend a little bit with obviously surpassing the medal tally from London in Rio in both the Olympics and Paralympics. I don't know if you could correlate between the two. Obviously, in the past, people have done as well.
Yeah, I think there was a big commitment of funds, so there was a big thing that there wouldn't be a drop off after 2012. The British government and UK Sport are very keen to say we're not going to drop off. We'll sustain the level of investment, and UK Sport are very innovative. As a coach, as an athlete, you have to understand what's contemporary, what's current, and try and stay one step ahead of the opposition, And so behind the scenes in UK Sport, how they've kept us ahead of the game across the different sports has been tremendous. You've got teams behind the teams who are around talent development, innovation, innovative thinking, whether that's technology or the way you manage teams or you develop coaches. It's real cutting edge stuff. And you talk about British science and industry and engineering being the forefront. We've got some of the best engineers and scientists in the world, and I think UK Sport have been over the last 10 years tapping into that expertise and taking a similar approach. So we may not be a big nation, but we punch above our weight, and we're smart with how we box, if you like, as well. And that's it's good. It's very proud to be part of that process. It's good to see. And if we're getting lots of other nations complaining about us, that means we're doing something right. I think. If the Australians are complaining, then we must be doing something right.
Oh, it's probably one of those things. A little bit. Especially when it's towards an end of a competition or at the end, it's a little bit. You could kind of take heart to it. It's a little bit of sour grapes. It's like, well, maybe you're obviously focusing on trying to peak at multiple things. Is probably not the way of going about it, because I think it was obviously the comment was obviously to do with, I think they have a World Championships that year as well, which I think is probably why maybe the countries don't do as well, because obviously they've peaked for that, and it's very, very difficult, obviously with cycling, to be able to peak twice in a year, and obviously Britain's probably gone away. Well, obviously that's ahead of time, obviously with scheduling. Well, that's going to be it. Obviously, I don't know if they sent a weaker team or something like that.
Well, I think it's it's almost like a training game type thing, isn't it? I mean, there's lots of factors there. It's not as you say, it's not just as simple as we haven't peaked and the other one have peaked for it. But that's part of the process, is that focus just on the Olympics, isn't it? And that, the Australians will have been focused on the Olympics, I'm sure. But what we do behind the scenes, I think, is that's where the edge is, isn't it? We've got good raw materials, good athletes, and it's how we support them, develop them, and give them the best environment to thrive in. And competition is one thing as well. So it's good to see. It's good to see.
And obviously, you say the team buying the team. It's something we've probably alluded to a little bit while we've been chatting. Is obviously, obviously, sports psychology is becoming more to the fore. In terms of obviously its publicity, it's getting obviously obviously it was a big one with cycling. Obviously with that, obviously your study of expertise is obviously to do with coping strategies and stress management and things like that. Obviously especially at the elite level, that's a very big one. Can you explain to people obviously what's the broader sense of what that would cover, as in with stress and coping strategies?
Sure. I think I think the notion of stress to one person is very different to what it is to the next as well. So stress, when people say I'm under stress, that stress is actually a process, if you like, of the daily challenges you face and daily demands that are placed upon you, from having to get up early to go and train, having to endure a long training session, having to travel back and your bus breaking down or the train being delayed. All the things in life that place a demand or tax us mentally and physically. We have various views of that. We have various ways of coping with that. And so one individual may feel challenged by the fact their bus is broken down or their train is delayed, and may feel it's going to threaten how their day is going to go, or cause a threat to them, and they may worry about that. And they may become anxious and fret. Whereas another person may see a delayed train as normal. That happens, and they may see it as an opportunity for them to do some more work on the train, for example. And so how people view all these different challenges, demands that were placed upon day to day, how people view that has a massive effect on how they then go and cope and deal with those things. And sport is no different. So, there are challenges around competing, the opposition, the track, the venue, the referees, the officials, the weather. There are challenges around the organisation of the sport, so the transport to the venue itself, your seeding, your drawing a competition. And then there are challenges away from sport, your personal challenges that may be relationship issues, life issues, all those sorts of things. And so, athletes have challenges like everyone else does in life, and how we view those challenges or demands and influences how we feel, and then how we actually cope with them. So kind of the role of a sports psych is to help athletes acknowledge what those challenges or demands are that they've faced weekly, daily, hourly, and teach them to help view them in a more positive light, and use strategies to help them kind of cope with them more effectively. Basic coping strategies. One may be to deal with the emotions you're feeling, to try and relax yourself or deal with the emotions. Another one may be to actually deal with the source of the emotions, the source of the problem that's causing the anxiety or the worry. So people can focus on dealing with the response to the challenges, if you like, or actually trying to remove the thing that's causing the challenge in the first place. So we call that one problem-focused coping, deal with the problem, and the other one we call emotion-focused coping. You can't actually remove the problem, maybe, which is the competition, the race, the tough opponent, but you can deal with your emotions, and you can focus on coping with how you're feeling about that and managing those emotions as well. So that's kind of stress and coping, if you like, hopefully very simply put. Lots of things going out there that challenge or tax us, how we view them, and how we then feel about them, and the strategies we use help us to cope successfully or less successfully, if you like.
Okay, that's quite an interesting point. Obviously, like you say, it's coping with these things. You've got control of. Obviously, it's the controllables and uncontrollables. You've
Yeah.
got no control, obviously, what your competition is going to do. Problems with transport, things like that. Obviously, at the elite level, you've got team management to sort all that thing out. Obviously, you're there just to compete. So if you just focus on being the best that you can be, that's the only thing you've got control of
Yeah.
getting the best out of yourself.
Yeah, and a lot of younger athletes will worry about the opposition and worry about a lot of these uncontrollable factors, if you like, and how you and helping them to understand that all you can control is your processes, how hard you work, how well you stick to your strategy, your race strategy, how hard you train every day, and how well you recover and look after yourself, and all of these things. If you put that right, then you've got the best chance of performing well. You know how well you prepare your tactics and strategies and all those kind of things. And often when there are a lot of demands placed on us, we tend to get distracted and we tend to focus on things we can't control, which causes further anxiety and worry, if you like. So it is about learning to focus on the right things, and we can be proactive, so we can plan for having a poorer venue to train at. We can plan for having a longer bus trip and having an overnight stay. We can be proactive within that, and that's obviously the best coping strategies are the ones that are you're forewarned and you prepare for those and you try and manage those as best you can. And as you say, the management, the coaches, the support staff, the team managers, they can create an environment where they minimise the effect of these kind of demands from the organisation, these unplanned things. They minimise the effects of those on their athletes and their teams. But a lot of the time, you've got to learn to react and cope with the things that change in the environment and, within the sport as well. Some sports, you've got to just focus on getting up and down that pool as quickly as possible and making sure your turns are as good and your technique is as good as possible. In other sports, in team sports, in balls, invasion sports, you've got to prepare to react to all of these different things that are going on. So it's really interesting as a psych working in different sports. Preparing for the competition, there's probably similar strategies, but then once you get into that competition, very different kind of techniques, and it's very bespoke to that individual athlete. I'm sure you probably have different ways of coping in the lead up to a race or a big competition, as well as then actually when you went into that race and that competition, and in between heats or in between trials and all those sorts of things. So it's fascinating. Some people learn just through experience. They reflect, they're self-aware, and they work out how to cope, and it works for them. Others don't and are less self-aware, and it's a process of making them aware of how they can cope better and giving them strategies or techniques to help them cope more effectively.
That's a quite interesting point you bring up, obviously, with the differences between obviously the ones that find coping strategies that work for them and obviously the ones that have to be taught how to do it.
Yeah, I think, look, you'll see in the press a lot of athletes who are very successful say, I never needed a sports psychologist. I didn't need anyone to tell me, and that's great. Through life and through the way you've been socialised and coached or educated, or the advice you've been given from a senior athlete, you've learned to cope and be successful. But other athletes do need that support, and sometimes it's not a sports psych. Sometimes it's an older professional athlete that gives them some advice around how they cope pre-competition, or other times it's a coach that has a very good awareness of psychological skills and training and is able to sort of give some broader advice within that, or refer an athlete onto a sports psych to help with that as well. Not everyone is naturally the strongest athlete in the world. They have to work on their strength. Some people are lucky to have high levels of strength, high levels of endurance physiologically, and they don't have to work at it as much. It's the same with psychology and psych skills. Some people, through their experiences earlier on in life and their development, have got good coping skills and can transfer it across situations. Others need more support and need more work with that as well. So it is an interesting thing. The challenge obviously is how we develop our talent pathways and programs. This development of mental toughness or resilience is kind of embedded in the experiences that athletes get. So you face adversity, if you like, and you help to reflect on how you manage that adversity and develop the skills to then apply them to any other challenging situations as you go through your career. And there's a bit of literature and there's been a bit of research around adversity and how you can create that in the talent development stage, but it has to be managed very well. So it's all very well, throwing someone in at the deep end and exposing them to that, literally, but they need to be supported after that and made to realise why they were thrown in at the deep end and what they've learned from it as well. And that's a good coach, a good support staff, good sports psychs will be able to facilitate that.
Okay, that's quite interesting. I might try and look to have a read of that. If you wanted some bonus content, I have now set up a Facebook group where you can interact with both the guests and I. The name of this so-called group is Mindset Game, so why not come over and check it out for yourself? And before I forget, I would really appreciate it if you would be so kind as to leave a short written review, as it helps to get the podcast more notoriety and it will be more visible in future to others, and thus helping more people, which my guests and I are all about. Once again, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time for another episode of the Mindset Game podcast.